The last tool that we use to make rough lumber S4S is the table saw. But please remember, before you come to the table saw, you have had to use our first three tools in our big four. First, let's begin by familiarizing ourselves with some of the basic components of this tool. In this photo, we're looking down at the tabletop of our table saw. The first thing that I'd like you to notice is the red saw stop sign on what's called the fence. The fence slides across the tabletop and is used only for rip cutting. Let's look more at the fence and the measurement bar. Now look at this picture and notice the bottom of the fence is the red handle. When you raise the red handle, it unlocks the fence so that you can slide it across the tabletop. Also, if you lower it, it locks it in place. Looking back at the tabletop, there is a red insert in the top. It is called the throat plate. The blade comes out of the throat plate. Also, there is this clear plastic piece that houses the blade, and that's called the guard. You must use the guard at all times when operating the table saw, unless its removal is approved by the instructor. Let's now look at the blade, the guard, and the throat plate in a little more detail. Let's start with the blade. The blade comes through the tabletop or through the throat plate and should always be set at a perfect right angle or 90 degrees from the tabletop. Surrounding and protecting us from the blade is the guard. Remember, the guard must be used at all times unless the instructor approves its removal. The removable insert in the tabletop is called the throat plate. When installed correctly, the throat plate is perfectly flat with the metal tabletop around it, and the blade comes through it without any obstruction. If you are ever approved to remove the guard by the instructor, you're going to have to remove the throat plate. The key here is to make sure that when the throat plate goes back, that again, it's flat and it's not obstructing the blade from turning. We'll talk later and in great detail about how to safely remove the guard. Let's now talk about our adjustment wheels. The front wheel raises and lowers the blade. So let's show you a video of how this works. Turning the front wheel clockwise or to the right raises the blade out of the tabletop. And conversely, turning the wheel to the left or counterclockwise will lower the blade. In both of these videos, the guard was raised so that you could see the blade easily. Please make sure that the guard is always down on the tabletop, covering the blade. Let's now talk about our side wheels and why there's this skull and crossbones on all of them. When we turn the side wheels on our table saws, it angles the blade, or more importantly, it takes the blade out of 90 degrees from the tabletop. In some of our classes, on some of our skills, we angle the blade intentionally, but only after the instructor demonstrates on how you do this safely and you get practice at it. So for now, the rule is never angle the table saw blade. So that's why we have signs with skull and crossbones on the side wheels. We're asking you with this sign, are you intending to take the blade out of 90 degrees or are you accidentally turning the wrong wheel? Because the vast majority of the time, we want that table saw blade a perfect 90 degrees to the tabletop. Let's now start talking about the miter gauge, and then we'll begin to tell you how to safely operate this tool. The miter gauge is going to slide in either of the two slots on the top of the table. All of our miter gauges have either a scrap piece of lumber or plywood attached to them to extend the fence. We use the miter gauge to cross-cut small pieces of lumber and plywood. The majority of the time, the miter gauge is a perfect 90 degrees to the blade. Sometimes we use it to angle cuts, but mostly we use it to just cross-cut 90 degrees on the ends of our material. Now let's begin by talking about what is appropriate material to cut on the table saw. To safely use the table saw, your material needs to have at least one flat face and one straight edge. And the flat face needs to be down on the tabletop and the straight edge needs to be against the rip fence the entire time. If you try to cut a piece of material that doesn't have a flat face, the board could rock. And if it rocks and gets trapped between the blade and the fence, you could have what's called kickback. The same holds true with the edge. If you try to cut a piece of material that does not have a straight edge, the board can get trapped, and if it's trapped between the blade and the fence, it will kick back. We're going to use the table saw for two types of cuts. First, we're going to talk about rip cutting, or cutting in the direction of the straws. So you bring your material to the table saw. It has one flat face, which is down on the tabletop, and one straight edge, which is against the rip fence the entire time. Now let's watch this short little video clip on how to safely set up and complete a rip cut. The operator has a flat face at a straight edge and then begins by setting the height of the blade. We only need to be tall enough to cut one piece into two, so any more height is just exposing ourselves unnecessarily to the blade. Next, the guard is always in place unless the instructor approves its removal. Set the rip fence to whatever dimension you wish to rip cut. In this case, we are going to rip cut a board that is wider than 6 inches, so we do not need to use a push stick. First, your left hand is going to hold the board against the fence the entire time until it is unsafe to do so. And it is unsafe to do so if your left hand gets anywhere near the front of the throat plate. It is your right hand with wide fingers and your thumb hooking the back middle that does all the pushing through the cut, with gentle pressure down and pressure towards the fence the entire time. Make sure you don't stop pushing the material through the cut until you've reached the back of the throat plate. Each time that you cut one piece into two, you're going to create an offcut. Make sure that you do not remove the offcut until the blade has come to a complete stop. Let's watch another rip cut, but from a different perspective. First, let's look at the left hand. The left hand pushes the board against the fence until it is unsafe to do so. It is the right hand that pushes the material through the cut, using your fingertips and thumb hooking the back middle. Once your left hand gets anywhere near the front of the throat plate, it needs to go away. Now, gentle pressure down and gentle pressure towards the fence. Don't stop pushing until you reach the back of the throat plate. Anytime you rip a piece of material less than 6 inches in width, you must use a push stick. Our push sticks are made of scrap plywood. They should have an intact heel and a flat sole. We use these to keep our hands away from the blade. Just like your thumb, the push stick is going to hook the back of the board halfway between the fence and the blade. A cut such as this that is less than 6 inches in width begins the same way as all of our rip cuts. Left hand's holding the board against the fence, right hand's doing the pushing. Except when you get close to the front of the throat plate, now place the push stick down, hooking the back middle or halfway between the blade and the fence. And just like using your hands, gentle pressure down and gentle pressure towards the fence. So our operator now is making a cut smaller than 6 inches. He has a good push stick which he rests nearby, so he's not searching for it while he's cutting. Just like all rip cuts, it's the left hand that holds the board against the fence and the right hand doing the pushing. When it's time to grab the push stick, the operator is going to place it on the center of the board or the back middle, halfway between the blade and the fence. Left hand has to go away, and pressure is gently pushed down and angled towards the fence. Make sure that you push material all the way past the back of the throat plate every time you make a rip cut. Now that we've gone over rip cuts, let's talk about cross-cutting with the miter gauge. To begin, make sure you never use the miter gauge with the rip fence. And just like rip cutting, your material needs to have at least one flat face and one straight edge, and that edge is against the miter gauge fence. One hand is going to be on the miter gauge knob. The other hand is going to be supporting the material down on the tabletop and back against the fence. With your hands properly located, make sure that you push the material on the miter gauge only far enough to cut one piece into two. Now a cut has been completed and you have an offcut sitting on the table. Make sure that you don't ever attempt to remove the offcut until the blade has come to a complete stop. And even then, remove the offcut with something other than your hand. Watching this video and finishing the corresponding worksheet does not make you an expert at using the table saw. So please remember, if you ever have a question, just ask the instructor.